Oh, it was horrible. It was absolutely devastating because uh, when you first kind of open that closet and you realize what you've put in there just on the surface, and you start kind of unpacking that, and then you start looking for the one thing that you think might be acceptable, and you finally get there and you realize that's way not acceptable. And I don't know what it's like for anybody else, but my secrets were secrets for a reason, you know, and to expose them, to let other people know about them. That was rough.
In the fall of 2008, my wife and myself really felt led of the Lord to move down to the outskirts of Tampa, Florida, and become the senior pastors of a church called the Life Church. In hindsight, looking back, I realized we had no idea what we were doing, but we knew that's what God wanted from us. And so we packed up, and by faith we moved. I wanted so desperately just to be used by God, and from the moment we got here, we began to realize that the Father was calling us to set people free. When I read the scriptures, I saw men and women that when they came in contact with Jesus Christ, they were genuinely and truly set free. And I'm talking about prostitutes and tax collectors and sinners of all kinds. It doesn't matter where they came from or who they were when they came in contact with Jesus. They were set free, body, soul, and spirit. In every way, it was just like their past was completely erased and a brand new future had begun. Well, the more I prayed, the more I realized this is exactly what the Father wanted from us. He wanted the Life Church to be a place where people genuinely came into contact with Jesus Christ and were set free. Well, the more we begin to pray about that and really seek God as to what that looked like and how we were to construct the church to be that place of freedom. In the year 2009, God began to deal with me about cultivating a ministry within our church that was specific to men and women called Locker Room Chat. Now, I played sports all through high school and into college, and there were things you would talk about in the locker room that you would never talk about anywhere else. And I felt like God was telling me, I want that to be my church. I want you to create that same kind of environment where people feel safe to talk about whatever's on their heart. So the more I began to prepare and seek God on what that looked like, I knew that it had to be something where people felt safe. And I'm not just talking about, again, that sometimes that Sunday facade that we put on. I'm talking about genuinely feeling safe. To where, you know what, I can express the deepest intimacies of my heart, show you the most ugly parts of my life, and not be pushed away and not be shunned and not made to feel awkward and out of place. So the more I prepared, the more I realized one of the ways that God was going to create that safe place was by me being a senior pastor, being as transparent as I could be about the closets of my life. Those ugly areas and those weak areas that, again, people tend to shove away in a closet. Man, the more I prayed, the more I studied, the more I prepared, the more I knew that God was saying, I'm going to lay you on the altar. and I'm going to lay you up there naked, completely exposed. I want people to see the good parts, the bad parts, and every part in between. Well, I don't know how it is for you, but I don't know too many people who are very comfortable being naked in public. I know I sure wasn't. But the reality is I knew that was exactly where God was leading me to go. Is to become that real and that raw and that transparent to where people saw that it was okay to reveal those areas of life. Well, we chose a date for our launch of Locker Room Chat. For this particular one, it was just going to be guys only. We're going to get all the guys together and we're going to get them in the locker room called the church. And we're going to talk about real life issues. Same way we talk about it if we were in a locker room when I was in high school or college. But I was scared to death. I was scared of what people would think. I was scared that people would be ashamed to follow a leader that was willing to be that open and transparent about the issues of life. I was afraid that if I was that real with people and they saw the worst parts of life, that they would leave. So I remember it was a Monday night, was our launch night. And we were all going to get together and Monday Night Football was on and we were going to create this whole football environment and we're going to watch some football and we're going to eat some wings and some food and then we're going to hang out in the locker room for a little bit and talk about real life issues that men deal with. That night I was so scared. I knew at that moment that I was going to have to walk in front of a whole group of people. And I knew I was going to have to stand in front of all these men and expose who I really was before Christ came and set me free. And I don't know about you, but the image I've always gotten of senior pastors is they've got it all together and there's no mistakes and no flaws and there's no sin and they're these perfect men, these perfect women that meet the needs of their people and never have any weakness in their life. And I thought if I got up and I exposed those areas of weakness that I've had to walk through and deal with, it I wouldn't have a congregation left to preach to. Man, that night I was so scared. And I remember thinking, Lord, are you sure this is what you want me to do? I was sweating and I was nervous and I could tell my voice was cracking. And I got up with all the faith that I had on the inside of me, trusting God that everybody wasn't going to just get up and leave. And I started showing them my closet. And I started revealing to them what was in my closet. And it's that very testimony that I'm going to share with you tonight. I can remember when I was a young boy. I can remember going over to my grandparents and seeing all these magazines and different stuff that my grandfather had. And as a young boy, I don't think you really know what Playboy is or what a pornographic book is. But I remember seeing them, and I didn't think anything of it because honestly they were right next to the National Geographic. So I remember seeing them, and I even remember times where we would go over to my grandparents' house, and I even remember times where my dad would go get these magazines and would go into the bathroom for like a 20-minute visit. And I remember seeing these things, and I can remember vividly those moments. But again, being a young boy, they really didn't mean anything to me at that time. Okay, now I want to fast forward to when I'm a young teenager. We're living in middle rural Missouri. We're on this 5-acre piece of property. You go on one side, you don't reach another neighbor till like a mile down the street. And you go to the other side, and we are right next to this huge landfill. So, as a teenage boy, I'm out there alone. Nothing really to do. At that time, there's no social media, there's no internet, there's none of those things. But I want you to see something very intentional that the enemy wants to do in our lives. See, the majority of the time, the enemy does not come to you. Satan doesn't come to you and put sin right in your face and say, here, take this. But what he will do is put you on the path that leads you to sin. And that's exactly where I found myself. My parents had made an agreement with the owners of the landfill that instead of them coming to our house and actually picking up our trash on a weekly basis, that they would send me over with our trash, and I would just walk it over, and I could throw it into whatever hole they were digging, and it would be of no charge. Well, our house was about, I'd say, 200 yards from this landfill, and it was all woods. So I had to kind of cut a path through there to get from our house to that landfill. And it was the worst. I'm going to tell you right now, lugging a bag of garbage from our house to this landfill was stinky. It was messy. It was always, as I walked through the woods, I was always being bitten up and chewed up. I got over to the landfill. I was always walking in ankle-deep mud because they were always digging everything up. It was really very unpleasant and something that I never wanted to do. Oh, and the other part about this that I haven't told you is the fact that when we were growing up, we didn't have that nice little petite 13-gallon trash can in our kitchen. We had like a 33-gallon outside construction trash can that we used. So I'm not hauling those little nice white bags of trash over. I'm lugging a big black trash can over my shoulder to haul this trash over to this landfill. I remember this one day, it was right in the middle of summer, and it was so frustrating and so aggravating. I'd been putting it off, and so now there are 2 bags of trash. So at this moment, I am so upset with my parents. I'm so aggravated that I've got to make this trip and walk through the woods and walk over to this landfill. So it was summertime, so I had asked my mom if I could just do it in the evening time when it got a little cooler. But as soon as I put that trash over my shoulders, and mind you, it had been sitting there for a couple of days because I was avoiding taking it over. As soon as I put it over my shoulder and I started to walk that way, I felt this warm sensation that started running down my back and down my legs. And what had happened was there was a hole in the trash bag. So all the nice, nasty juices of whatever's in that bag is running all down my back, all down my legs, and it stinks to high heaven. With every step, I'm getting more upset and more angry with every single step that I'm taking. And I'm going to be as transparent as I could be with you. I was so mad at my parents. I just remember in that particular moment, I was so frustrated and so aggravated thinking, can we just not be normal like everyone else and have our trash picked up? Why do I have to walk it over there? And with every step I'm taking, I'm getting more upset and more mad with every step. Now again, keep in mind, and the enemy is crafty. He puts us on the path that leads us to sin. And I had no idea, but I wasn't just on a path that day taking trash over to a landfill. I was on a predestined plan and predestined path that the enemy had set up for my life. So I make it over to the landfill. And I'm carrying these 2 bags of trash. I got stuff dripping all down the back of me. I'm as ticked off as ever. In that moment, I'm screaming, I'm cussing, I'm yelling. I am so frustrated in that moment. And I remember there was this big hole that they had dug, and I threw one bag in the hole, and I was so ticked off. I kind of wheeled around, and I threw the other bag, and it kind of rolled down this other hill into their pond. And in that moment, I was so angry. I was never really a destructive kid growing up. I mean, I never had those desires to want to break stuff and tear things up and all those things. But in that moment, I was so angry and so upset. I can remember grabbing rocks and just throwing them at the equipment that's all around there. And I remember breaking windshields and side glass, and I was so upset. And I was mad at my parents, and I was mad that I was standing in a landfill, and I was so mad and upset that I was taking out all those angers and frustrations on everything I could. And I remember looking around and seeing this white shed, and it was like a work shed that they had. And I walked over to it, and it wasn't locked. And I remember opening the door, and the second I opened the door, right there on the floor of the shed are these 4 pornographic magazines. It was in that moment that I remember grabbing them, taking them, and running off into the woods. There's a very unique scripture found in Amos 4:2. And I want to read it to you, and here's what it says. It says, "The sovereign Lord has sworn by his holiness. The time will come when you'll be led away with hooks in your noses. Every last one of you will be dragged away like a fish on a hook." So I want you to really think about it for just a moment. Think about what it must be like to be that fish with a hook stuck in your mouth, and you don't get the option to go left or right. You may try, but the reality is you're being pulled in the direction that you may not want to go. But I'm stuck. I've got this hook in my life, and I want to go this way, and I know what's right and what's wrong and what I should do and what I shouldn't do. But the reality is I'm getting pulled a direction that maybe I don't want to go. And in that moment of life and time as a young teenage boy, all of a sudden I've got these emotions and these feelings, and I'm going through changes anyway, just being a teenager. And now all of a sudden the enemy has sunk this hook so deep into my life that I can't get away from it. Dare I say it's probably the same hook that was in my grandfather, same hook that was even in my father, and now the same hook that the devil has stuck into me. Well, I'm just in this whirlwind of emotions and feelings, and I'm not even knowing what's going on, but all I know is now every minute of every day, all I want to do is look at these magazines, and I want more and more and more of what's on the end of that hook. It's in that moment that I realize I've got a real problem. I've discovered this principle of life. When I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. I love God's law within my heart, but there's another power working within me that's at war with my mind. This power makes me a slave to sin that is still within me. Oh, what a miserable person I am. Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death? Thank God. The answer is Jesus Christ, our Lord.